All right. We live?
Yep, you're good to go.
Cool. Hey, good morning, everybody. Happy Solana season. My name's Dan. For those of you who maybe have come across me on Discord, I'm DanPaul000. I'm here on Twitch and Twitter and Discord at your service. So I've been working on the Solana core team for a couple years now, and I've currently been managing a lot of our validator programs on behalf of the Solana Foundation. Driving a lot of these growth initiatives from the network infrastructure standpoint. And what I wanted to go over today is a look at network infrastructure that would be of interest to people building dApps and new products and services for the ongoing Solana hackathon, as well as just in general. So Solana, you can effectively think of the network infrastructure kind of in two overlapping halves. So we have the validators, which are the actual consensus nodes of the network. The validators validate transactions, vote on blocks, and actually drive the whole consensus mechanism of the network. And then we have the RPC nodes. RPC nodes themselves are also validators. They simply don't participate in voting in consensus, but do all of the same work under the hood to validate blocks, make sure that they have the latest up-to-date account state, as well as providing a public RPC or a public API endpoint. So I just kind of wanted to go over like these two aspects of the network infrastructure, particularly as we've seen in the last few months with this incredible explosion of services and interest in Solana. There's this incredible growing demand for new RPC services. And so for anyone who's building a dApp on Solana that's going to make any sort of transaction with the cluster, it's really imperative for production level dApps that want to provide a good user experience to have some understanding of how the RPC infrastructure works, as well as to have a dedicated RPC service, either a fully dedicated service or part of a shared RPC service in order to provide a reliable user experience. So that's something that's really important to understand for developers. There's a couple ways that you guys can go about doing that. So, I just want to cover this RPC growth. And then I'm also going to talk about what it's like to run actually a consensus validator, effectively a full node that doesn't provide a public RPC service, but does vote as part of the consensus mechanism, how we're hoping to continue to grow the network infrastructure as far as getting to these validator nodes, in every country and every data center all over the world, to make Solana the most censorship resistant network on the planet, and what programs and incentives we have in place for people who are engaged technically with the Solana ecosystem in case you might also be interested in running a consensus validator for yourself as a potential business model or revenue stream, or just as a general enthusiast. All right. So first kind of topic I'm going to dive into is, node architecture, or rather like node overview. Like I was saying, validators, really to have a machine that can keep up with the Solana network. Solana is the fastest blockchain in the world, and as such, it has pretty fast hardware requirements for all of the nodes on the network to actually keep up. So this applies for both consensus validators and RPC nodes. I'm going to send a link in the chat here. So a lot of people have noticed in the past, the hardware requirements for running a validator that can actually keep up with the Solana network. It's not going to work on your laptop with your home Wi-Fi connection. Requires, I'll send you the link in the chat here. Effectively, running a validator or an RPC node requires a dedicated bare metal server with really pretty high-end specs. 12 core minimum, 2.8 gigahertz processor. Usually most people these days are working with I think like Intel Xeon server chips, or either like the high-end AMD Ryzen or AMD Threadripper server CPU architecture. 128 gigs of RAM, 1 or 2 terabytes of NVMe SSD storage, as well as really high quality, low latency network bandwidth. So a lot of these specs can add up and look like a high performance compute server that you'd find in a data center. By the numbers, they're also pretty comparable to, I'll say, a very high-end gaming machine these days. For anyone who's got some spare PC parts laying around. But the one challenge with the gaming PC approach is that residential internet often, and residential Wi-Fi and modem equipment can't keep up with the latency requirements and the uptime requirements. So just about everyone who's running high quality RPC or consensus validator these days is doing so in a co-location facility or a data center, either renting or leasing a pre-configured server, or building their own and having it installed in a rack in a data center somewhere. Okay. So on the RPC side, we actually have been getting some questions recently, as it was the case until recently that generally a consensus validator would be able to keep up as an RPC node as well. But RPC nodes, in addition to doing all of the ledger validation and state validation of every account on the Solana chain, are also providing an API front end that is either public or private to a list of whitelisted IP addresses. And as such, RPC node hardware requirements are actually quite a bit higher than standard consensus validator. Again, these are general recommendations, but we do think that they're pretty accurate based on what we've been seeing with some of the RPC service providers, and what they've been testing. Has really picked up. So that's a bit about hardware. So from a user standpoint, and this is where, if you guys are building a dApp, this is the important piece to recognize. An RPC node, or this API endpoint that you can that your DApp points at on the back end to actually submit transactions or receive confirmations or check state, do anything on chain. The DApp interacts with the RPC node. The RPC is your DApp's gateway to the cluster itself. And so if the RPC node fails or has poor performance, that's going to lead to terrible user experience. And what a user will see if your RPC node fails, or if you're pointing a production level DApp at a public rate limited RPC node, what the user is going to see is, oh, my transactions aren't going through. Oh, this app isn't working. Oh, the Solana blockchain is running slow today. Our poor RPC performance looks like poor network performance from the user experience, when in fact the bottleneck is often, and it has been the case, as the network's really been growing recently, has been the case that transactions simply aren't making it to the RPC node and aren't getting forwarded to the network, when in fact the network has plenty of capacity. The blockchain's lightning fast, but if it's not receiving the transactions, that leads to really, really crappy user experience. So currently, just to kind of give you guys a sense, there are about 600 voting validators, about 600 consensus nodes on Solana. A couple months ago, there were probably 20 RPC nodes, give or take, a handful of which were run by the Solana Foundation. A couple were run by the kind folks at Project Serum, providing these public API endpoints. Today, there's about 300 RPC nodes, in addition to the 600 consensus nodes on the network. Just to kind of give you guys a sense of how quickly demand for these interfaces to the network is actually growing faster than the node count of the network itself, as far as the number of consensus nodes. So when you guys are building your DApp, there's a bunch of ways you can test a DApp in development, when you're still in alpha or beta, or just doing your local development. That doesn't require you to get one of these high-end servers or front the money if you're not sure if your service is really going to take off, or if you're ready for prime time. So the first option that we provide for developers, and I would recommend anyone who's hacking in like the current hackathon to check this out, is we have this test validator, which I just sent the link here. So this is a command line tool that you can run on any machine. You can run it on your, on your VM. You can run it on your laptop, and it effectively creates a local endpoint for you to, if you're running your local front end, you can just point it at your loopback IP address 129.0.0.1. I'm sorry, 127.0.0.1. And you can get, effectively like a minimal local cluster running on your machine. And so this doesn't use any network resources. It doesn't cost you anything. And so that's kind of the first option. When you're in development, you can also use one of the public API endpoints. So Solana has 3 networks. We've got DevNet, testnet, and mainnet beta. DevNet is really the kind of preferred playground for you guys, for developers who are building dApps. We provide a public RPC endpoint for DevNet. Let me grab that. That is api.devnet.solana.com. Similarly, there's a couple public API endpoints or RPC endpoints for mainnet beta. If you like to test in production, we've got API mainnet beta.solana.com, and then the Solana api.projectserum.com. Any of these public endpoints, either on DevNet or mainnet, do not provide any sort of SLA, uptime guarantee. They are rate limited. So, if you start spamming the public API endpoint with, 1,000 requests per second, a lot of those are going to get the RPC service provider might blacklist your IP and not service any of the requests. So just know these are provided as like a general public good, but are not intended for, you know, production level quality user experience. We also maintain a public endpoint on our testnet, although this is not particularly recommended for like hackathon development unless you're specifically doing something along the lines of like network analytics or network performance testing or metrics or monitoring. Testnet is really where the validators go to really like test the latest version of the Solana validator software. The network itself is not guaranteed to be stable. It is sometimes subject to attacks, or if someone, you know, wants to you know, attempt any sort of exploit that they think they might have found, testnet is the place for that. So devnet is your safe sandbox. Mainnet beta is production. Given the importance of this, we have a couple options to kind of present. The first thing, actually, I want to send you guys is this link to this Google Doc. I'll share my screen here so you guys can see it with me. Oops. Sorry, one sec. So we put together this RPC infrastructure overview document. A lot of it just kind of reinforces what I've been describing here. As we had a lot of questions over the last few months, you know, there were certain occasions where the network got overloaded, or I'm sorry, the network didn't get overloaded, but certain apps were using RPC nodes that got overloaded, and it looked like, you know, the network was having problems. So this is a really important piece that I want to make sure everyone who's building in the ecosystem understands. We put together this nice little one-pager here, this RPC infrastructure overview. That kind of goes over what I've been talking about here, just as like a quick one-page reference for you guys. Or what is an RPC node? Here's a link to the Solana test validator that you guys can run in your development machines. It's just a nice, you know, little command line tool. Some recommendations from some of our engineers. You know, making RPC calls can be optimized similar to optimizing your code. There are certain RPC requests, particularly get program accounts, get signatures for address, and get confirmed block, that for one, like fetch a lot of data from the latest account state on the RPC node. And also, if an RPC node gets spammed with some of these requests, it can actually cause the RPC node to fall a little bit out of sync with the network, and then it needs time to catch back up. And so you could kind of induce, you know, the node to fall out of sync. The reason for that is that some of these calls actually put a write lock on the account state. So the RPC node and all validators really track kind of two things in parallel. There's the ledger itself, which is, you know, the actual blockchain data structure, the history of all blocks and all, you know, all prior transactions, you know, that have been confirmed by the network, as well as the account state. So this is the global state machine that is Solana, that is the current balance and data and status of every account across the network. And so whenever you get transactions that are confirmed in blocks, that state is updated. The account state is updated. And so the accounts database gets written to with every confirmed block, which is about every 400 milliseconds. Some of these big RPC requests put a lock on writing to the accounts database, on updating the accounts database until the call is complete. And so if they're being called too frequently, and the account state is not being able to be written to because the write lock is in place, that could actually cause the state to fall out of sync with the tip of the cluster. So these are just kind of some things to think about as you guys are developing the apps and services. All the RPC calls we are listed in our docs, as well as the Solana Web3 JS library. So we have this the JSON RPC API. All of these methods can be called, for testing purposes using curl or any sort of direct API interface as you like. So for example, get account info. I'm just looking at a basic one here. We have an example of how to curl this against the local host. So if you're running the Solana test validator process, in a background shell, you can run any of these API calls against that. Here's the link here. And then similarly, our Web3 API for all of your JavaScript delight also will hook up to these nodes. Let me send you this link here. All that being said, what a lot of people have, there's been this increase in demand, and some services are spinning up to meet this demand. Is, you guys are building dApps, right? Or someone wants to build a service on Solana. If you want to make, maybe you're a small team, or you've just got a couple developers or a good idea, you want to focus on building your dApp. You want to focus on building your services. Maybe you don't want to have to focus on also provisioning, running, and managing an RPC node. So to that end, in addition to these free services, these public API endpoints that I pointed out here, there is now a number of teams and companies that are offering RPC as a service to anyone who wants to interact with the Solana network. This is, I think, I would recommend anyone who goes to production level deployment to use a dedicated, either shared or dedicated, but some guaranteed RPC as a service. So right here at the bottom of this infrastructure overview, we've got RPC pool, Chainflow, Figment, and Run nodes are 4 projects that either currently or in the near future will be offering RPC services. The team behind RPC pool are longstanding validators, as well as Chainflow and Figment, have been running consensus nodes on the Solana network pretty much since the beginning, and kind of have recently started branching out to kind of using the expertise gained in running consensus validators to also provide RPC services. The RPC pool team actually provides the backend for the Solana Foundation's public API endpoints for mainnet beta. So this API mainnetbeta.solana.com actually just forwards to the free tier, if you will, or the free tier, the public tier that the RPC pool team is offering. And they have scaled pricing, depending on your needs, $100 a month, couple $100 a month, more or less. I think it's pretty configurable across all 4 of these teams. If you need one server, if you need multiple servers behind a global load balancer, a lot of that can be abstracted away so that you guys can just focus on deploying your service and know that you're going to get a great user experience. So highly recommend checking these guys out. This is really a rapidly expanding kind of business area within the Solana ecosystem is providing these RPC services. So there might be some more players that enter the space here, in the coming months. So yeah, I would recommend just bookmark this RPC infra overview. If any of this was kind of unfamiliar to you, really important that, everyone building on Solana understands. All right, I'm going to talk about some consensus validator stuff. I'm going to take a look at some questions. I haven't been following the chat too much. If there's anything urgent right now before I switch gears. Okay. I hope it looks like I think I answered most of these questions as I was kind of talking through. I did see there was one question that came up about, if I'm running a dedicated RPC endpoint, why not also run this as a voting validator? It is technically possible to use an RPC node as a voting validator. I would really not recommend it. I think, particularly given that the write locks and some of the big RPC requests that I was referencing before can, I think, will cause a consensus node to fall out of sync with the network a lot more frequently. And I'm not sure about, so the difference between an RPC node and a validator node, sort of from like a functional standpoint, is that a non-voting validator is also like an unstaked validator. And so an RPC node should never enter the block producer schedule or the leader schedule. If it falls behind due to any sort of like spamming requests or difference in how the RPC node is serving up the ledger or the historical data on the back end, is going to end up causing, I think, poor voting performance. And similarly, if a staked RPC node enters the leader schedule as a consensus node, and it gets hit with RPC requests, it's going to result in poor block producer performance. Thanks. Linus makes a good point. There's also a security risk of exposing an RPC endpoint, which effectively, RPC is remote procedure call, so you could potentially DOS or try to overwhelm a voting validator that is staked and voting to kind of disrupt consensus. And so it's really kind of the worst of both worlds. So for that reason, we really, while we can't enforce it, really encourage keep these as separate services on different machines. Cool. You're welcome. Okay. So for reference, here's that Google Doc again. I think someone was just asking about it. One other thing I want to point out, and the following actually applies for both consensus validators and RPC nodes. For anyone who's tried to get their hands on a high-end server in a data center in the last several months, will know there is currently a global supply shortage of high-end compute hardware. There's incredible demand for servers in data centers all over the world, and there's only so many chips, and a lot of people have been having difficulty actually acquiring these services. And so the Solana Foundation has actually been working with a number of very large data center providers and hosting services across the globe to secure hardware that potential validators or potential RPC node operators can then acquire and lease directly. So we are let me see here, put this form together if I can find it. Sorry, 1 second. We're working to make validator quality servers and RPC quality servers available to anyone in the ecosystem who wants to acquire them. So we have this kind of general interest form. I just sent the link in the chat here for anyone who might think that they want to get their hands on their own server. The way that we're setting this up is like, Solana, the network is decentralized. We're not taking control or taking possession of any of these servers. We're simply trying to make them available to our community. Oh, link's not working, huh? Sorry, let me see if I can get that fixed real quick. All right, I can send that a little later if that one's not working. But pretty much it's just like, we're just trying to collect general interest from folks in the community to see who might be interested in participating in this program to get a server to participate in Solana. So I'm going to switch gears and I want to talk for a few minutes about consensus validators, the actual voting staked validators. Right, the validator, validators on Solana is akin to the miners on a proof of work blockchain, right, like Bitcoin or ETH1. Given that Solana is a proof of stake network, instead of mining for blocks and competing through the rapid expense of compute power and electricity to earn rewards for mining and earn rewards for participating in consensus, the Solana proof of stake architecture and the consensus model is built around these validators competing for stake as a means to participate in consensus and vote on which blocks they think should be confirmed into the blockchain. And the more stake that a validator has, the more rewards they earn for their participation in consensus. So we have to date about 600 validators on the mainnet beta. There's about 2,000 nodes currently running on testnet. And one of our goals is really to make Solana as a network the most censorship resistant network in the planet. And the way that we're going to do that is by getting nodes run by thousands or tens of thousands of different people and entities, in every major data center, big and small, in every country in the world. So it's a somewhat ambitious goal, I think. And we want to encourage people who are interested to learn about how to run a node and join us on the network. From a straightforward, oh, I want to run a validator. I'll send you the link here. But more importantly, or more pertinently, to run a validator does require dedicated hardware. And as you've seen from some of these hardware specs, it's not a cheap machine. Now, the cost of hardware only goes down over time. So what is a $2,000 or $3,000 server today will be $1,000 in a year or a couple years. So even though these are kind of, can look like pretty steep requirements, particularly when you're talking about commercially deployed bandwidth in a data center, it's really, I I think making its way to be kind of mass attainable. That being said, there is still this, this not trivial monthly cost. So the Solana Foundation runs what we call a delegation program. We want to promote as many people running validators on Solana as possible. And a validator's, if you're participating in consensus and you've got your good machine well configured, the validator earns SOL tokens for every block that it produces and for every vote that it confirms on a confirmed block. The more stake that a validator has delegated to it from individual token holders, the greater the rewards. And so the biggest challenge often on proof of stake networks for new validators is, well, how do I attract stake, right? You can launch your validator node and you can start paying, the cost to run the server. But if you don't attract stake delegations, which come from, either SOL tokens that you yourself have run, tokens that you yourself, own or have purchased, or coming from a third party. So the Solana Foundation has this program in place, and we're rapidly evolving it. I'm actually going to be putting out an announcement later today or tomorrow about kind of the evolution of this program. But pretty much the foundation has a large allocation of tokens that it is dynamically distributing as delegated stake to any validator on the network that signs up through this program and meets certain performance and decentralization criteria. And so what this really provides is an avenue for anyone who's interested to potentially bootstrap their validator service and bootstrap their potentially like a validator business if that's something that is of interest. And know that they will get at least a certain amount of stake from the Solana Foundation, which should hopefully, be more than enough to cover the operating costs as well as some of the time costs, while attempting to attract more third-party delegations. So just wanted to let you guys know that that is an option. And then in addition to the Solana Foundation doing this, stake distribution program of the tokens that are held by the foundation. Coming over the next few months, something I'm really excited about, kind of evolving in the ecosystem, is this program we call stake pools. So stake pools, it's an on-chain program. It's a smart contract that is effectively, we're going to use it to attempt to encourage a more even distribution of stake across the network. So we can have Solana validators and nodes in every data center in the world, and that's great. But if all the stake on the network is concentrated among a small number of those node operators, that's where a lot of the voting power, that's where a lot of the block production power lives. And that is a smaller target for a disruption of consensus. This is a problem that every proof of stake network faces. And this is sort of our approach to really tackle and incentivize the true decentralization of stake. So I'm going to share my screen again. And what I want to point out is this is Solana Beach, which is a network explorer that's been put together by Staking Facilities, which is one of the longstanding validators and ecosystem partners. So it's solanabeach.io. And if I go to the validators tab, what you guys can see, once this loads in a second, is that we have 613 voting validators right now. And what it says here under halt power 16, that means the top 16 most heavily staked validators, which I'm kind of showing here on the page, collectively hold 33% of the active stake. So on a proof of stake network, compromising 33% or more of the stake is enough to halt consensus and effectively, stop block production on the network. I believe so. This is still a number that is, as far as I'm concerned, much too small compared to the number of validators we have. It is, I believe, still the largest percentage of independent validators of any other sort of modern generation proof of stake blockchains, but it's still, as far as I'm concerned, not good enough. What we want to see is if there's 600 validators on the network, that the first, a third of that controls a third of the stake. So we want to distribute the stake as evenly as possible. This is a really intractable problem because this is held by our community members, people who have purchased Sol, and those are their tokens. It's no one controls it but them. What we are hoping to do, right? So when you stake to a validator, you as the token holder earn rewards, and as a reward for staking, and the validator charges a fee to the people who stake to them, and that's how the validator makes money. So we can see, just looking at the top 10 or so validators in the fee column, 8%, 7, 5, 10. Some validators charge 0% as a way to attract people to delegate, even though they don't make money off of that. They could change the delegation. Change the fee at any time once that stake has come in the door. So it's sort of like a promo rate. What happens is a lot of people purchase Sol and they say, oh, well, I want to go stake. How do I stake? I create a stake account and then I go and I pick a validator. And you look at this list and you say, oh, I'm going to pick the guy on top. He must be good. Well, the validator who has the most stake, therefore, then ends up getting even more stake. And so there's this sort of behavioral pattern where these nodes that have the most stake then continue to get more and more stake, even though they may be just the same quality as any of these other nodes that are further down the list that have been working just as hard and have just as good performance and low fees and everything, but simply that they're further down the list and so they don't get noticed. And so that really kind of works against this idea of the even distribution of stake, which is what's going to make Solana the most censorship-resistant network in the world. All that said, what we're working on building towards is this stake pool program, which I had mentioned a few minutes ago, which will provide a liquid staking interface connected to some program on the back end that will dynamically distribute and rebalance all of the tokens that are collected in the pool across all the validators in the network according to certain criteria. Currently, when you stake, if you want to stake your tokens, you create a stake account and you can delegate that stake account to one validator. And if you want to delegate to multiple validators, it's a couple steps. It's, you create 10 stake accounts, you delegate this one to validator A, this one to validator B, this one to validator C. It's a little labor intensive, and it makes it hard to say, oh, I want to delegate to all 600 of these, wonderful validators. And it makes it difficult for these guys lower down the list who are just as high quality to attract stake and help, spread the love around the network. So stake pools is our proposed solution to this. Rather than having individual token holders need to manually create a stake account, manually, scroll down the list and pick individual validators to delegate to, you can deposit Sol from your wallet into a stake pool, which is this on-chain program, and receive back an SPL token, which indicates your, fractional participation in that pool. So now you have this SPL token that represents, hey, I'm participating in stake pool A, or I'm participating in stake pool B. And these tokens are liquid and they are yield-bearing assets, because what happens on the back end is that this SPL token represents actual stake, and actual staked Sol earns more Sol. So the back end of the program will assess the performance, the decentralization, any other criteria that the deployer of the stake pool is interested in, and will dynamically rebalance stake for maximum performance, maximum returns, maximum decentralization, either by geography or ISP or physical location. And so we can really start to tune for these criteria. And what you as the token holder and the community gets are SPL tokens that represent an increasing number of SOL over time. So this is a liquid yield-bearing asset, which we're really excited about because this could be used as any sort of collateral or underpinning for a lot of the DeFi Legos and services that are currently being built on Solana. And so, rather than managing the stake accounts, you can simply go buy stake pool tokens on an AMM or on any sort of token swap interface, such as Radium, and manage these accounts individually. So that's kind of where we're going. So those two big facets combined, the foundation delegation program, announcement forthcoming on the new sign-up flow for that, as well as the stake pools to encourage, broader community stake distribution. I think, will not only help with Solana's like global censorship resistance, but also really make it attractive as a potential business model to any of you guys who might be thinking of running a validator and are worried that, oh, where am I going to get stake from, which is, impacts your returns on running this consensus node. Okay. So that's what I got. I'm going to take another quick look at the questions here. And then I'll let everybody move on with their day here. Looks like there was a request for the Google Doc link. Oops, sorry, that was the wrong link. How many? All of them. I work every hour, every day. Yeah, so there's a question, is there a way to rank or vet validator quality? There's a number of tools that have kind of popped up. It's a difficult question because, I do get this question a lot. People say, hey, I want to, I've heard about staking. You've told me that I can, make my SOL earn more SOL. Who should I pick, right? Who should I delegate my stake to? And the answer is there are hundreds of really high quality validators on the network. Most of the validators, except for like small variation in what fee that they charge, are going to give very similar returns. So it's really not to me to encourage, stake to this one or don't stake with this one. It's really sort of more of like a community driven thing. A lot of these validators do have websites. They might have other business services or value added products or services that they offer to people who stake to them. And that often is like, you can reach out to them directly. Hey, I'm thinking of staking with you. What do you offer? You can go to the solanabeach.io/validators page, which I linked here, and click on any of the validators in the list. If they have a web page, it'll be linked there. You can also look at validators.app, which I see Brian Long posted as well. So validators.app is a service that, Block Logic, Brian Long, who's one of our community validators, created. He's also one of the members who runs the RPC pool, RPC as a service. And so there's a lot of stats here, as you scroll down the list, looking at different validators. For the less technical community, it can be a little overwhelming. Say, okay, well, I see this one has this vote history and this skip rate and this block production. So the real long-term goal here is that stake pools will sort of abstract away the need for an individual token holder to make that decision. And you can simply look at, there's, hopefully there will be a handful of different stake pools, and the stake pools themselves will compete for, highest returns, most SOL. The party that deploys a stake pool does collect a small fee when SOL is initially deposited into the pool. So there's a little bit of like a free and open market competition or competitiveness there, if you will. And so, I really hope to see community created and community run stake pools, competing with each other to the benefit of the token holders and the network itself. Are there planned SLAs for first-party Solana RPC nodes? I'm not sure what you're referring to by first-party endpoints, which we provide just as like a public free service. We don't provide any sort of SLA. If you're working with a dedicated partner, such as Chainflow or Figment or RPC Pool, you can reach out to them directly to talk about what the SLA might be or what the terms are. Nope, a validator cannot steal your tokens. So when you delegate stake to a validator, you still hold your tokens. They still belong to you at all times. You still hold the key. You are simply like increasing the validator's consensus voting weight by directing your stake, saying, oh, I'm gonna, I've got 100 SOL and I'm gonna delegate with validator A. Now validator A has a slightly increased voting weight and block production schedule, but they never hold your tokens directly. Seems like tokens compete with SOL for capital. If token supply increases, will SOL price decrease? I can't speak to anything about the price of SOL, but if you're referring to stake pool tokens competing with, right? So stake pool tokens can be swapped for actual SOL. So the same amount of capital still exists in the ecosystem. Have I been to Antarctica? Yeah, I actually did. I used to work in Antarctica before I worked for Solana. I'll tell you that story later. Recently joined TDS as a validator. Would it make sense to try to join mainnet beta? Yeah, so if you recently joined TDS, which is Tour de Sol, which is our incentivized testnet program, I'm going to be, like I said earlier, I'm going to make an announcement, hopefully later today, maybe tomorrow. We've been working internally on kind of really refactoring the delegation program to make it much smoother and much more accessible for anyone who's been in Tour de Sol to join us on mainnet and be eligible for the delegation. I'm hoping that within 2 months, anyone who has previously or for anyone who's previously signed up for the testnet program should be eligible if they want and are able to meet the performance criteria to be eligible to receive stake on mainnet beta. Can a validator change the fee after you stake? Yes, a validator can change the fee at any time at their discretion. So, that's something to just be aware of. However, any validator who goes from a 1% fee to a 50% fee and doesn't warn their delegators is probably going to lose those delegators pretty quickly. So there's like a reputation stake there as well for them to operate, a reputable business. But similarly, if you have a savings account in the bank and the bank can change the interest rate without telling you, it's kind of the same idea. But if they keep jerking you around and cut your interest rates, well, they're going to lose your business. So kind of same idea. So we are at time. Thanks everybody for joining. Appreciate your participation in the hackathon. And we'll see you all on Discord.